So each presentation has a 17 minutes, and we expect a good discussion afterwards, so probably please make a punctual presentation. The first presenter is Professor Beatrice Niccolini, the epistolary interview of Napoleon, unraveling Anglo-French library in the Gulf and the Indian Ocean. Please.
Thank you very much. Again, thank you to the conveners, organizers. Thank you to Professor Francesca, because the effort has been huge, and we understand the importance of meeting again in presence after 2.5 years such isolation. And also, this topic in our country is very much neglected and isolated. So I myself, I am just me in Milan, which is a huge place, and there are a few people working on this region throughout Italy. So these initiatives are much more important in this country probably than in others. So this is something that honors this university and honors the professor. So really thank you again. My research activities in this region have been focused on more than one littoral that is in South Central Asia, on the southern part of the Arabian Peninsula and along the coast of Sub-Saharan East Africa, because I have been searching about the history of the island of Zanzibar. And it was one of the first research and books in Italian, because to tell you the truth, this is a country that chose ignorance, so the majority of the Italians do not know anything about the global south, let's say, which is maybe something, I mean, made on purpose, probably. And I decided today to present you a way of reinterpreting some very much interesting manuscripts. So we have this 19th century scenario, let's say, where Napoleon was in Egypt, and on 25th January 1799, he wrote letters to more than one protagonist of this region. There was Sultan of Mysore, that was one of the last states that they revolted against the Anglo-British government in India. And then there was an enclosure for the Sultan of Oman, and a letter to the Sheikh of Mecca. The proposal inside these letters that are named famous intercepted letters was an alliance with France against Britain. Because the idea of Napoleon, as we might know, was invading India. Therefore, the whole policy that was named defense policy after this menace was giving a huge importance to the eastern part of the African continent, not because they were interested in Africa, but because of Asia. So even today, if you think about the huge crisis that we are living, not only in Eastern Europe, but also in the Middle East and also in Iran today, you can understand probably why this geopolitics has been created in order not to defend something that it was, geographically contiguous, but defending the most precious colony of the British Empire, that was India. So the result of this proposal, of this letter, of this huge menace, was that these letters were stolen, were intercepted by a British spy. This Captain Wilson took these letters, went to Mocha, that is a port in Yemen. From this name, you use maybe the mocha to make coffee in the morning. And he translated them in English and sent them 2 copies, one to Mumbai, today it was Bombay, to London. If you're familiar with the British Archives, when you see copy 2, so when you see 2 copies, then you can understand that the British policy assumed a different aspect. The danger of a French military attack is part of the world, and we are talking about the first years of the 19th century, modified totally all the defense policy of this part of the world, because there was the awareness of a huge alliance. So Napoleon sent spies in Tehran at the court of the Qajar. Antoine Gardan was this general that organized treaties with the Persians. And also there was an alliance with the emperor, the Tsar Alexander I, in order to attack the Chipoli from the north. The military menace produced many cartography, many maps that didn't exist before. Because this region that we have been talking, it was very interesting this week, about Baluchistan, that is a region half in Iran, half in Pakistan. The reason why it has been politically divided, it was this one. It was the European menace, it was the French menace of an army that could invade India, and the necessity to divide a country that didn't have a state. So everything that was not settled, everything, even today, if you think about movement of people, movement of groups, all realities that are not settled, they represent a menace for the power. So the necessity to create a new entity in a region that was scientifically defined terra incognita. I mean, nobody knew what was between Persia and India. And the first explorers that were around 1810 decided to make secret reports to the British authorities. We have to bear in mind that during this period we still deal with the East India Company. So the East India Company was the most richest and powerful entity of the world of the epoch. I mean, Amazon is nothing compared to the East India Company of the epoch. And there were just 10 men in a probably stinky black house in the center of London that you can still visit. And they are full of greed, and they didn't want to spend for an army in this part of the world. So this idea of the informal empire that has been very much studied by James Onley, for example, was produced by a European menace. So the result of these letters is that we are dealing what could be named today as fake news, because probably famous intercepted letters never exist. Probably it was an alarm created by some functionaries on the field in order to receive more power, in order to receive more visibility, and just claiming military menace from France that probably was never a reality. So you see, even today in the Middle East, everything is very much different from what you think it is. So this is a way of reinterpreting a reality which is huge inheritance. Just let me know how. Okay. So what I would like you to be aware of is of this necessity to look at the African continent never separated from the Asian one, because there is no history of Africa without Asia and vice versa. And also about what happened to these territories with regards to the relationship inside the Indian Ocean. Because all these groups are living even today in this southern region of South Central Asia, as Benaz well described, are still under a huge attack by the government, huge attacks by the secret services, both in Iran and in Pakistan. The reason why political borders were designed, it was this menace of the danger that France could take such a source of richness for the Anglo-British government, Anglo-Indian government, but also the necessity to create new entities in a region where the alliances have always been very much flexible, and also to give a new aspect to the local agreements and trades inside the Indian Ocean. Event totally the future policies, and unbelievably, they are still influenced by these historical letters that we might suppose never exist. Today, you see, we are living at terrible times of the world. You have a lot of propaganda, you have a lot of fake news. You are believing something that maybe is not really corresponding to reality, but simply corresponding to singular interest, as we know. So the terrorists that you can read for these Baluchi groups, the Sunnis, persecuted in Iran because they are persecuted in Pakistan, accept the Islamabad policies. Pakistan is a nuclear power, so this region has always been used for nuclear tests, and you have tumors and you have death. So to be exploited because this region has been discovered uranium. So Pakistan is not going to give autonomy for no reason, for sure. So the result of this political conflict today is probably given by the opposition of artificial political borders, which were destined and are destined to be the source of the problem of today. Thank you very much. I'm sorry that I didn't have time. And I just want to explain what I'm doing in my university, just in case somebody would be interested. So I have 3 courses. One is History and Institutions of Africa. The other one is Religions, Conflicts, and Slavery. Slavery is a huge success, I tell you, because in this country we don't have courses with the official label slavery. Maybe we have many courses that are talking about the topic inside the course, but not the official label. And this happened probably because my dean didn't read. He didn't see that it was going to be like that, and it's very successful. And then I have a course in English about the Indian Ocean, which is short, but is also very successful as well. And I introduced personally a Swahili language and culture course in Milan. And there's a collaborator of mine, she's mother tongue English, from Tanzania. So anybody who wish to subscribe, come, join our activities, you will be most welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. So our next speaker is Mr. Abdul Hakim Belhassel, and then understanding the Omani rule in the East Africa in the 19th century through the monsoon system.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for being here so early on a Saturday morning. I would first like to thank the organizers for this wonderful event, and especially Francesca Deklich, Lucas, and Silvia. This presentation is part of a PhD that I'm currently working on at Université Paris-Nanterre, and that focuses on the history of Omani domination in East Africa in the 19th century. My thanks to the conference organizers are all the more necessary, as this presentation is an opportunity for me to test some hypotheses by taking the conference theme quite literally. What was the impact of the monsoon, which governed the rhythm of trade in the Western Indian Ocean, and therefore between East Africa and Arabia, on the functioning of the Omani Empire on the region, and especially on its military functioning? It is very much a work in progress, so I apologize in advance if some things are not quite clear yet, and I'd be delighted to have your feedback and remarks. In the first part, I will try to show how the monsoon winds constitute both an opportunity and a difficulty for the constitution of an Omani empire in East Africa. Then I will focus on two aspects: the military effects of the monsoons and the effects of the introduction of steamships. It is well known that long-distance trade in the Western Indian Ocean was made possible by the monsoon winds, which allowed sailing ships to travel from the Persian Gulf to East Africa and back. Let me quote here from Fahad Bishara's celebrated book, A Sea of Debt. Quote, "The role of monsoon winds in shaping trans-regional connections. Monsoon winds are an essential part of the Indian Ocean world, giving trade, migration, and agriculture their seasonal rhythm. From November to January, sailors could count on winds blowing from Arabia and India towards East Africa. From April to August, the winds blew in the opposite direction." But as the verses from the famous Swahili poet from Mombasa, Muyaka, reveal, the northern monsoon not only brought merchants from Arabia to East Africa, but also potential invaders. Muyaka wrote several poems to galvanize Mombasa's resistance to Omani expansion into East Africa during the first decades of the 19th century. Here is one of them. At the beginning of the northern monsoon, the powder horns must be on the hips. At the start of the northern monsoon, when the northerly winds begin to blow, you will see the great birds of prey, the lions of Ras el Khaimah. So the powder horns are used to carry gunpowder for the guns, obviously. And indeed, the Omanis, the monsoon, enabled the Omanis and other Arabians to come make war in East Africa. The monsoon enabled the Omanis to link their domain in Africa and in the Arabian Peninsula. And thus, the arrival of the northern monsoon marked for some Swahili the dreaded moment of invasion by the Arabs, so the Omanis and the lions of Ras el Khaimah. Thanks to the ease of sailing between Arabia and East Africa, the Omani began to establish themselves militarily on the Swahili coast in the second half of the 17th century. Zanzibar became the center of the Omani Empire in East Africa, both because the island remained loyal to the Busaidi dynasty that came into power in the 18th century, and because the island had a harbor that offered good protections to ships during the southern monsoon. Under the sovereign Sayyid Said and then his son Majid and Barash, Omani domination gradually extended and strengthened along the Swahili coast and beyond, relying mainly on troops brought back from the Arabian Peninsula and Balochistan. The monsoon enabled the Omani rulers to move troops quickly from Arabia to East Africa. It took around 3 weeks to sail from Muscat to Zanzibar in the northern monsoon, but it could also act as a barrier, making navigation dangerous or even impossible in the opposite direction, thus imposing a seasonality in the movements and also in the movements of the military. You will recall that Muyaka's verses were not against Omanis, but against people from Ras Al Khaimah, near Oman, it what are now today the United Arab Emirates. Indeed, merchants from various locations in Arabia and the Persian Gulf sail to East Africa every year. According to the British consul in Zanzibar, Rigby, the Arabs who traveled to East Africa each year also included many people from Sur. They arrived around mid-November with northeast monsoon, salt products such as dates, dried shark, and returned to Arabia with the southwest monsoon around April with slaves, ivory, and mangrove poles, and so on. According to Rigby, they were so numerous that in Zanzibar, the population of Stone Town doubled during the northern monsoon. He described them as thieves, pirates, and called them Northern Arabs. Without subscribing to this trope, we can, however, note that they were not only merchants, but that some of them were also prepared to join the military adventures of the Omani sovereigns in return for payment, to the point that the military expedition followed their arrival in East Africa with a northern monsoon. From 1840 to 1863, the Swahili city-state of CU rebelled repeatedly and often successfully against Omani domination. The expedition launched by Sayyid Said and then by Sayyid Majid against CU all followed the arrival of the so-called Northern Arabs. In November 1843, Sayyid Said gathered 1,600 men at Zanzibar, and he was waiting for reinforcement, about 3,000 Arabs to join, before launching his attack on CU. As the expedition ended in another defeat, another one was attempted the following year. How did Sayyid Said proceed? He sent emissaries with the southern monsoon to Arabia to recruit troops. Some came from Oman and others from the coast near Ras Al Khaimah. So Umar Qawain, Ajman, and Dubai. So nowadays, which are nowadays Emirates from the United Arab Emirates. These troops arrived in Zanzibar with a northern monsoon, and then another attack on CU would be launched. This expedition was a resounding defeat for the Omanis and their allies, but CU nevertheless more or less entered back into the fold after negotiations. In 1862, CU rebelled again, and Sayyid Majid had to send 2 expeditions there. The first in December 1862, and the second in December 1863, again relying on so-called Northern Arabs. And as you can see, the monsoon thus continued to dictate the timing of military campaigns. The monsoon explained both the seasonal nature of military campaigns and the movement of the Omani sovereigns, Sayyid Said, who personally led many military campaigns. This letter from Said to an Omani sheikh shows us that Said was preparing to leave the Swahili coast with a northern monsoon. So he actually left at the beginning of November 1833. And it also showed us that he could plan his return. He said that he would be back in this month, so when the southern monsoon would come. To ensure the political coherence of an empire whose centers, Muscat and Zanzibar, were cut off from each other much of the year, the Omani rulers had to adapt. This forced him to delegate power in his absence and to warn his vassals, so in this case, this Omani Sheikh. Said therefore called on members of his family, in this case his son Hilal and his cousin Muhammad, to act as interim rulers in his absence. And he did the same in Zanzibar, always relying on his family. But you can see that here the regularity of the monsoon allows him to predict when he will be able to come back, supposedly. But the regularity of the monsoon also made the arrival of the Omanis predictable for their opponents. As you remember, Muyaka warned the inhabitants of Mombasa of the arrival of the northern monsoon as a time for invasion. Still in Mombasa, Said Said succeeded, after battle and negotiations, in having a Normandy garrison installed in Fort Jesus in 1828. But on the 12th of May 1828, just after Said Said had left with his army for Arabia with the southern monsoon, the inhabitants of Mombasa revolted again against the Omani garrison and surrounded Fort Jesus, where the Omani garrison was entrenched. Launching the revolt at this point ensured the people of Mombasa that they had several months before reinforcements could arrive from Arabia. Said Said did indeed send reinforcements in the following northeast monsoon, but it was too late for the garrison of Fort Jesus, which had surrendered a few days earlier. The reinforcement sent by Said then had to return to Oman with the southern monsoon and wait for the following northern monsoon to come back in force and retake the city in December 1829, yes. The inhabitants of Mombasa were thus able to play with the timing of the monsoon to revolt at the best moment. According to Guillain, who visited Banadir in the 1840s, and is the author of the daguerreotype of Marca that you can see here on the screen, the Banadir ports were only accessible from late September to October, and in February, March, and early April for sailing boats, because the monsoon winds were too strong for ship. When there were revolts in the region, they also coincided with the monsoon, so that the Omani warships could not come and bombard the cities for several months on end. Guillain thought that because of this, the Banadir was under Omani authority only part of the year, describing the route there as a seasonal. Of course, the Omani soldiers could also travel by land rather than by sea, but they were then vulnerable to ambushes, and this did happen. One solution to all these problems of moving troops around was to have troops on the spot. And for instance, in 1834, once again with the goal of reconquering Mombasa, Said asked the Queen of Madagascar, Rana Varumanzaka, to put at his disposal 2,000 soldiers. Indeed, quote, Muscat is far away, while Madagascar is closer, being only 5 to 6 days away. Said did not want to wait for the northern monsoon to receive reinforcements. However, even though Madagascar was closer, the monsoon winds could hamper communications. In April or May 1834, for instance, the messengers and gifts sent by Said to Rana Varumanzaka were blown away by the monsoon. It didn't reach you because it was blown away by the monsoon and had to return to my home in Zanzibar. Once again, all the doors I had intended to send had left, but they had all returned home because the monsoon had blown them away. In any case, Rana Varumanzaka refused to come to Said's aid. The problem of moving troops around from one part of the Omani Empire to another was to continue for many years to come. But the monsoon is just about not the winds that allow prevent sailing, it's also about the winds that bring rain. Last November, I was doing archival research at the Zanzibar National Archives, and I noticed two things. The first was the English translation of a letter of Sayyid Majid. In October 1859, the younger brother of Majid, Sayyid Barash, revolted against him. And when Sayyid Barash's forces were entrenched in a fortified palace, Sayyid Majid's troops did not dare to attack. And it took the intervention of the British allied to Majid to win the battle. British sources questioned the bravery of Majid's soldiers and, quote, the habits of procrastination peculiar to the Arabs, unquote. A further explanation, and one which I prefer, can be found in Sayyid Majid's letter. According to him, quote, though it was raining hard, I ordered my troops to attack. At this time, we had no guns sufficiently large to batter the house, and as the rain was falling in torrents, I ordered my troops to retire, intending to send for some larger guns, unquote. So the rain was a factor in play here. It is not possible to use a matchlock under heavy rain, as the rain would extinguish the flammable cord. Flintlock rifles and capsule guns were developed to overcome this problem, but the Omanis kept on using matchlock rifles until 1875. Yeah, so I skipped some parts to finish in time. One solution to the constraints imposed by the monsoon is just technological innovation, modern guns in case of the rain, and steamships to evade the seasonality of the displacements. It is no coincidence that the Zanzibari historian Said bin Ali al-Murairi lists that when he lists the achievements of Sayyid Majid, the first thing he mentions is his acquisition of a small steamship. From 1865 onwards, Majid and then Barash built up a fleet of steamers purchased in Bombay, the USA, Alexandria, Scotland, Germany, and so on. And under Barash, Omani steamers regularly linked Zanzibar to the Comoros, Madagascar, Jeddah, and India. Naturally, the choice of steamers was not without constraints. Engineers were needed to maintain the machines. And it was also needed to be able to source coal. Indeed, when Sayyid Barash set an expedition to quell descent in Kismayo, at the south of the Benadir coast, just before the beginning of the northern monsoon, well, the steamship allowed him to do so, he reminded his envoy, and the envoy he sent there with soldiers, Saud bin Hamed, that steamships needed to be refueled. This also explains why Barash launched exploration mission in search of coal deposits in the southern ends of his empire. But it was nevertheless a way of waging war without the constraints of the monsoon. For instance, when Musa Fumo, one of Barash's allies and vassals, was involved in a war in Gazija, in the Comorian archipelago, Barash was able to provide Musa Fumo's vizier, Ahmed ibn Shangama, with a steamer. The steamer enabled Ahmed ibn Shangama to leave the Comoros in December 1882, travel to Muscat and Sur, recruit mercenaries there, and to return to Ngazija by the end of February 1883. This would have been completely impossible with sailing ships. It would have taken maybe a year. The steamship fleet gave Barash influence as also in Arabia. This was well understood by all concerned. So when his fleet was destroyed by a hurricane in 1872 and he had to rebuild it from scratch, the attitude of his brother Turkey, who ruled in Oman, changed abruptly. Turkey had perceived that the loss of his steamers removed Barash's power to project his troops into Arabia. And indeed, if you read earlier letter from Turkey to Barash, he is very almost subservient to him, and after that, much more aggressive. So, thank you everybody for your attention.
Thank you so much. Next paper, is Simon there online?
Yes.
We don't have. Okay, so now, okay, so we put Simon at the last, and then so Marie-Pierre and Elve, are you ready?
Yes.
Okay, so now we
Good
move
morning
to
to all.
Okay, good morning. So now we move to the Marie-Pierre Ballarin et Elve Pennec on the slavery and the post-slavery in African Indian Ocean island and island societies, current state of research. Please.
Okay. Thank you very much to listen to us, and we really apologize for not having been able to join you physically. Thank you very much for also the very nice images of Mombasa. I used to work in Fort Jesus, and I'm still working with colleagues from the fort, and it is very nice to see these old images. So we are here to introduce, I'm Marie-Pierre Ballarin, I'm researcher at the Institute of Research for Development. I did my PhD on Western Madagascar, and then after I started to work on the East African coast, and especially on the legacies of slavery on the Kenyan coast. And Hervé is from the CNRS, and I will let him introduce himself. We are here to introduce you to the network that we created since 2017, which is called SLAFNet, Slavery in Africa, a dialogue between Europe and Africa. And also to make a proposal, and I will give the floor to Hervé. So in 2017-16, we were happy to be granted by the European Commission to establish a scientific network of several institutions in Europe and Africa in the field of slavery studies. And so the project was supposed to end on 2020, but because of the COVID, we just ended last year. But the network now is created, and so this is the opportunity for me to present it to you. And our goal was to conduct a research on both historical and contemporary slavery and forced labor, and to emphasize its international dimension. It involved African and European researchers from various disciplines from different parts of the world with complementary skills. And we hope that it enriched the analysis of the underlying local situations and address the impact of slavery and slave trade on population histories in Europe and Africa. So I just put some slides. So this is a small document. This is 2 pages, which is presenting the network. If you are interested, I can send it to you. But somehow everything started in 2014 in Nairobi, where some of you were present. And we organized at the Catholic University of Eastern Africa a big conference that we on slavery in Africa, and our aim was really to allow as many as possible colleagues from the African continent to share, and it was also a choice to organize it in East Africa, in Nairobi, where the topic was still not hidden, but not so much worked, or at least not so much visible. And so the SLAFNet involved many, around 50 researchers from France, England, Britain, and Portugal and Germany, and of course many colleagues from the African continent, so in Cameroon, Senegal, Kenya, Mauritius, and Ethiopia, and also some civil societies and anti-slavery activists from Sahel. The project was composed of 3 components: training, research, diffusion, and aimed to address main objectives such as promotion and support scientific and cooperation between African and European researchers, to support as well the development of new collaborative linkages, the building of capacities of junior researchers, and also the encouragement of exchange and synergy between researchers by supporting their mobility and establish a sustainable network. Our colleagues from the continent went to Europe, and ourselves went to the African continent, and we were able to share, to discuss some different occasions. So we had 4 main work packages. So the first one was really to understand citizenship, marginalization, and injustices in post-slavery societies in Europe and Africa. So really worked in crossway. The work package 2 was to analyze dialectic between remembering and forgetting slavery, which is also a topic which is quite common, I should say. And the third one was to explore processes of heritage appropriation of this history on an individual and national scale. So we really had big museums working with us, for Jesus, of course, but we had also the which is now the Intercontinental Museum in Mauritius. We worked also in Nantes with the Château des Ducs de Bretagne, and we worked also on sites on dealing with the memory of slavery. And the fourth work package, the idea was to make an inventory of existing databases and resources on slavery in the Atlantic and Western Indian Ocean. And this was led by our colleagues from Mauritius, Professor Vijaya Tilok and her team, who really did a huge work involving colleagues from Kenya and now Tanzania. So So since 2017, when we started, research progressed through the development of field training and networking activities. And so I just put some example of what we did, because the East African coast and the Western Indian Ocean were widely represented, thanks to teams in Ethiopia, Kenya, and Mauritius. At the beginning, now also we have the chance to have Tanzania with us, and we had some very interesting activities in these countries. The impact and results were really to increase scientific contribution to African slavery studies by exploring the compared histories of transition from slavery to post-slavery across African region, and acknowledging the political significance of these transformations. Of course, to improve also dialogue and exchanges between researchers, activists, politicians, and civil society, which was very important to us. Also to bring together specialists of slavery in Eastern and Western Africa, Atlantic and Indian Ocean regions, and Francophone, Anglophone, and a bit of Lusophone countries and historiographies. Of course, we hope that we boost dialogue and exchanges between researchers and young researchers. One of our objectives was to improve dissemination of results to the non-specialists. So we had some activities, like, for example, in Mauritius in 2018, we had methodological schools on sources and archives. We had also a training on installed digital software. And we had a very interesting international conference on the abolitionism and emancipation in Africa, I should say. And so we were able to invite 3 activists, 2 from Sahel, Biram Abeid and Ali Bouzou from Team Idria in Niger, with whom we have been working since 2014, and also colleagues an activist from Uganda. We had also so this was the training on the software at the University of Mauritius. We had also, for instance, archival workshop at the University of Lisbon, which really allowed our colleagues from Mauritius, especially, to work on archives that they needed. And we had also colleagues from Mombasa, Okoko, who is dealing with the audiovisual at Fort Jesus Museum, who benefited a lot from the expertise of Portuguese colleagues. We had a very important also summer school in Ethiopia, where we involved the colleagues from Kenya and Sudan, which was led at the University of Addis Ababa, and with colleagues, important colleagues for us, Julia Bonacci and Alexander Meckelburg, who are working both in Ethiopia for many, many years. So this is part of the team. Then we had a very interesting also workshop on the dissemination of content on the subject of slavery in Africa in Mombasa, where we had also our colleagues from Ethiopia who came. And we had also a workshop with civil society and associations of descendants of freed slaves at the end of the 19th century on the Kenyan coast. So this is a team. We inside for Jesus. We had also a the screening of a documentary, Slavery Roots, and we were able to screen it with discussions in the Alliance Française in Mombasa, but also within Fort Jesus. You have here the head, Fatma Touahir, of Fort Jesus at the moment. And so this was a way to allow civil society and larger public to watch and discover more on the story of slavery in the region, I should say. So 2 years ago, we had another conference, Slavery in Africa in Cameroon, where many colleagues, where most of the colleagues from the network was there. And so this is in Cameroon, in Yaoundé. And last year, we were happy to be welcomed by in Dar es Salaam, by Nyanto Salvatori. In his university, we had a wonderful conference where many colleagues from the network, more, and then a lot of colleagues from Tanzania were involved, and it was very good for us. And so the network contributed, but we had also the support of 2 RC programs led by Benedetta Rossi and Felicitas Baker and the French Institute of South Africa in Nairobi. So now, I will conclude and give the floor to Hervé. But now, one of our objectives is the development of teaching modules on slavery in Africa. The idea is that we need to impact national curricula and to transform the way we look at enslaved people, their descendants, and the structures of domination. This is something which is really missing in our universities. And we hope that a wide impact of this network will be still expected through public presentations and discussions about slavery, social status, and human rights, contributing to raise social awareness and foster solidarity. So I really thank you, and Hervé.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Then we do. Is Samson? Where are
sorry.
you?
Excuse me. Yeah.
Sorry. Please.
Yeah.
We still have time if you like to say
It's
something.
not finished.
We have almost finished. Hervé?
If you like, you can talk because we still have time.
Okay, thank you. Very much.
3-4 more minutes.
Okay. I'm Hervé Pennec, researcher at CNRS in France. But before the presentation, I'd like to present my apologies to the organizer. I'd rather I've been with you because of the social interaction by Zoom is a tricky situation. And per mangiare passatelli, srozzapetri per visitare.
Could you, excuse me, could you tell again, because we cannot hear well, so if you go close to the microphone, could you speak again, please?
Oh. Okay, before the presentation, it's okay?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah,
So-
could you speak a little bit louder?
Okay.
Yeah.
So, thank you, Marie-Pierre, for your presentation of the SLAFNet project. This allows us to highlight the issues and the geographical area we need to focus on. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to make a proposal that may be of interest to specialists on the issues of slavery and post-slavery in East African history. I'm not a specialist on this topic. However, as the director of the French Academic Network on African Studies, I can propose to have a team to carry out, to support the proposal, to finance, because we have the funds for this project. It will be a proposal from the French Academic Network on African Studies, GIS, Études africaines en France, entitled Current State of Research on Slavery and Post-Slavery in East African History. First of all, I'd like to present briefly the French academic networks on African studies. In a few words, 10 years old, created by the CNRS, National Center Scientific Research, Division of Humanities and Social Sciences. The main objective of the academic network is to make African studies in France more visible internationally. To this end, we provide a platform for exchanging consultation and initiatives within the academic community. To survey scholarly activity in the field and keep track of their evolution. And finally, to shape and bring together research projects on Africa by encouraging a cross-sector approach, transversality, be it disciplinary, thematical, geographical, or institutional. After decades of work by scholars on the question of slavery and post-slavery in East Africa by the network SLAFNet, it's crucial and necessary to draw and underlining the various research projects on the subject to establish a current state of research and to understand and to think about the future and to focus on specific topics concerning this part of Africa. Without being a classic book, the project will instead take the form of a report which allow us to present the current studies and the networks behind them, and well as reflecting on the gaps and perspectives. This conference is the best place for thinking, sharing, making proposals, and strengthening the network of academics and scholars working hard on this important topic. And the French academic network would help to build this report with a logistic team, with financial support from the network, supporting the research team such as PhD students. This kind of research could be useful and effective if we share and combine our strengths for better knowledge of this crucial topic in African history and the present day. What is the main objective? Well, to coordinate the implementation and assist the responsible team in realizing the current state of research on slavery and post-slavery in East Africa. For that, first of all, the first step will be to collect data, secondly, to write the report, and third, publishing with an academic publisher and online. The work will be organized into two phases. First, to discuss with academics about collecting data, implementing of a protocol for collecting and treatment, surveys using electronic questionnaires and interviews, organizing data processing and participating in data analysis, gather and archive content, questionnaire, text, interviews, etc. And secondly, drafting the current state of research.
Excuse me, could you summarize in the next 1 minute? Because we like to go to the discussion, sorry.
Okay, monitoring contributors and preparing a copy. Yes, and just I'm finished. Designing the layout, preparing the graphic elements of the publication and arranging for the preparation of all illustrative documents relating to the project. Thank you for your attention. Merci beaucoup.
Merci.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So now we move to the Q&A session. So if you have any comments or questions, please raise your hand and then okay. So please, Salvatore, could you start? And then we follow Urbino style, 3 questions, and then we go to the.
Hello, good morning.
Yeah, we can hear.
Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for all these wonderful presentations. To, first of all, Professor Beatrice Nicoli, I liked your presentation and would also be happy perhaps to visit you one day in Milan, because I also work on slavery, and I've also been supervising students on slavery. So congrats, and I also therefore look forward to working with you. To Professor Marie-Pierre and Herb Pennock, these are really colleagues, and I should also be grateful, first of all, for their kind support. They have also they did also support our conference, as you have also seen one of the images, and they have also been very kind to our institution in general and the department in particular. So I find this this project extremely important and also timely, and I also would also I wish to register my appeal and Herb Pennock, if at all we could also work together. I have also been thinking of recruiting PhD students to keep on working on slavery. So I find this to be an important intervention, and I therefore look forward to working with you. Now if I may perhaps go to Abdel Hakim. I'm sorry if I really have failed to pronounce your name well. This is of course a PhD project, and I have a couple of issues to perhaps to share with you that would also help you to improve the project. So one, I suggest that you, because you're talking about the monsoon winds, I suggest that you think about Abdul Sharif, the work by Abdul Sharif about the Thou culture, which
Yeah.
was published in 2010. But I would also invite you to think about an edited volume by Abdul Sharif and Eng Seng Ho entitled The Indian Ocean, Oceanic Connections and Formation of Societies. But I think what is important, because they are also using the Blooderian approach, la longue durée approach, looking at the Indian Ocean from la longue durée approach. And I was perhaps perhaps intrigued to see that you are also you are also using the same approach. So what is really intriguing to me is what is new, and why should we perhaps pay particular attention to a project? I think readers would also wish to see this coming out from your project, that you are talking about the monsoon winds. Okay, what is new in your project, and why should we perhaps pay attention to a project? Or why is this project of yours an intervention to the existing scholarship on the Indian Ocean? I think this would also be important for you to think about. But thirdly, it would also be important to think about the sources that you are using. What sources are you using to make the arguments that you are raising, and what's new from the sources that you are using? But what is important, what are the limitations that as a researcher you might encounter as you navigate through these sources, and what are the coping mechanisms? Finally, looking at these sources is also challenging. Of course, there are evidently degrees of exclusion and inclusion. So I think it is also important to think about the voices from these sources. Are you perhaps looking at the cultural exchange resulting from the interactions between Oman and Zanzibar? Are you also looking at the ritual performance? Are you also looking at ritual authority? Or can you get the sailor's experience from the sources? So I think these issues would also help you to think about the project. And finally, I should also declare my interest that I have also developed a project that is similar to yours, but I'm looking at the legacies of the Omar Sultanate in Zanzibar, but now taking a different direction from Zanzibar all the way to mainland East Africa as far as Eastern DRC. And I also would wish to have PhD students being included in the project. So I also find.
Yeah, okay, Salvatore, thank you so much. We'd like to move to...
there are ways that we could also talk and see.
Diana?
It's a good project, and I wish you all the best. Thank you so much.
Good morning. Thank you very much for the presentations. I have a question, which would be a common question for Ms. Marie-Pierre Ballarin, Mr. Herve Benek. Regarding your networks and your research, I'm very interested in the way this idea of decolonization of the mind is seen in Africa during the researches and the conferences you held there. I mean, what was the approach, especially because Ms. Ballarin said there were many activists from Africa talking, so sharing ideas. And I wanted to understand if in the discourse of this dialogue between Africa and Europe, there is also on the African continent some sort of reluctance to the idea of colonial archetypes and mindsets. And if during the researches that researchers made, there on the ground, they have encountered you have encountered different approaches based on what national, let's say, is the researcher. Like, for example, if he is French, is differently approached than an Italian or an English or a German. Thank you very much.
And then, so Professor, Ian.
Thank you. Yes, I have a question for Abdul Hakim, of course. Yeah, well, I have two questions from the same sort of train of thought, which is the relationship between, or the encounter between the Omani colonial endeavor and the other colonial endeavors, the French and the British, and perhaps no longer the Portuguese, possibly, yes, the Portuguese actually in the early period. Because the winds, I mean, I'm thinking about the island of Nzwani, Anjouan, where you had two principal towns, Mutsumudu and Damoni. And the traders from the north came and they sailed round to Damoni, which is in the lee of the northern monsoon, and traded. And then when the monsoon changed, they went back north and the Europeans came and they stopped at Mutsumudu, which was in the lee of the southern monsoon. And so you had the rivalry between the towns really being shaped by the monsoon. And it's interesting because they didn't really meet. The English, as it was, or then the British who came to Mutsumudu and resupplied and then went on to India, didn't meet the Arabs because they'd already sailed. And then by the time the Arabs come back, the winds had changed and the Europeans didn't come. And it's just interesting to think how the monsoons really shaped the political history of that particular island. So what I'm saying there is, do you have similar sorts of encounters on the rest of the coast, where the encounters between the Omanis, because there was conflict and struggle for power once the Europeans arrived in the area between the Omanis and the British and the French. Yeah, can you make similar sorts of observations in other parts of the coast, how the monsoon system actually shaped the encounters between different colonial powers? And just sort of linked to that, I mean, your observation about the steamship coming to Gazija, I mean, yes, very, very important. And then again, part of the rivalry, because they supported Itsandra Msafumu, who was fighting Said Ali, who was backed by the French. So actually it was also a colonial encounter by proxy, if you like. The Omani sort of British aligned, although Msafumu didn't like the British, he didn't want to talk to Wazungu. But it was that sort of axis against the French, and again, you know, the encounters between two colonial powers being played out, as happens everywhere. Yeah.
Okay, so yeah.
Thank you. I would like to ask you about the choice of writing Omani Empire. So this concept that is perfectly Western, what is, I mean, the decision to name an entity which is particularly different from Western empires to such an area which we might be aware that was destined from the European authorities to become an empire in order to create what I was trying to explain this morning, a state entity where the state doesn't exist. So the idea of saying Omani Empire is explaining which kind of concept in your research. This is my...
You can go now? Yeah, let's go. Okay, so first the Abdul Hakim, and then Marie-Pierre, and then Elbe, please. So, please.
Thank you very much for your questions and comments. So first I'm going to answer to Professor Salvatore Nianto. Thank you very much for all these suggestions and questions. I'm aware of Abdul Sharif's work, but I need to go read the book he co-edited with Eng Seng Ho. As to what's new what I hope to bring, what I hope to bring to the discussion is not only focusing on the monsoon as shaping cultural exchanges and commercial exchanges, but putting to the fore its role in the military confrontations and in the actual day-to-day functioning of this Omani empire. And I will come back to the name of empire. Yeah, that's the different thing that I hope to be able to bring. Okay, you asked me about my sources. I could go on and on and on about them, and I don't want to bore everybody to death. But I mostly use European sources and Arabic language material. The obvious limitation of that is, well, you reproduce a kind of colonial gaze with the European sources, obviously, but also with the Omani sources, but a different one. And what I think is, what I hope to bring with this PhD is by connecting these different views, the Omani view and different European views, better understand what's going on in East Africa. Another limitation is that I have much more European material than Arabic one. But I have been able to find diverse Arabic material, most of them, untranslated, in France, a little bit in Zanzibar, in Oman, in India, and even in Kenya. So, yeah, that's what I'm going to try to do. About what you said about the ritual performances and the Omani soldiers in Zanzibar, well, I don't know much about it, and I'd be very glad to be able to talk to you about it and be in touch with you afterwards. So Professor Walker, you asked me about how the monsoon shaped encounters between Europeans and Omanis. I'm afraid I don't know much about that, so that's not much of an answer. Obviously, there were many encounters between the Europeans and the Omanis, and okay, now that I think of it, in 1874, Barashi's fleet had been destroyed by a hurricane, and so there was a revolt in Mombasa, and he had to ask the British to come to his aid because the British had steamship and were able to come and bombard Fort Jesus. So that would be one encounter. But what you said about the commerce is very interesting, and if you don't mind, I'll be glad to be able to talk to you more about it. Now, about Professor Nicolini's question about the term empire. Yes, it is a very European word. How do the Omanis describe their empire? Well, in the sources that I encounter, for decades, they just don't have a word for it. It just exists, and that's about it. And then they use several words. They use the word Sarkar, which comes from Persian, and was also used by the Mughals in India, and then by the British in India. So probably it's an influence from the British in India or from Persia. It's not quite clear yet. And Sarkar became in Swahili Serikali, because of government. And they also use at some point the term Dawla al-Aliya al-Arabiya al-Busaidiya. So the Dawlat, yes. So the exalted state of yeah. So at some point they began to describe the empire this way. But of course, it would have been a bit long for me to explain that at the start of the discussion. So I chose the term empire because it's easier to explain, yes? And the title of my PhD is the Omani domination in East Africa, in part because a part of my work is to be able to define this political entity what it actually was. I don't think that it was designed by Europeans. I think that it was a creation, like very, very chaotic creation, and that took influences from the Europeans, from India, from Persia, and from Arabia, and also from the Ottoman Empire, one which has been overlooked. So thank you.
Thank you so much. So now Marie-Pierre and Hervé, please.
Voilà. Okay, sorry. So I don't know if I will be able to, thanks Nianto for your kind message, and it is very nice to work with you. I hope we will have other many opportunities. Concerning the other questions, so I'm not sure that I will be able to respond clearly, but what I would like to share with you, it is so the network was mostly between French-speaking countries and English-speaking countries. So we did not have the chance to involve colleagues from Italy, which is a pity, even though we had Portugal and working more on Mauritius and Senegal. So in terms of colonizing mind, decolonizing mind, the objective of the network was and is really to share in equity and a balanced manner between the countries involved, and the involvement of the civil society and especially activists were crucial for us. Actually, in 2014, we had in Nairobi, we had the chance to welcome two activists from Niger and Mali, and it has been like a start. Since that time, we are really able to work more and more with activists from Sahel, but not only from Sahel, from Cameroon, from Kenya, from Mauritius. And our objective has always been to engage more and more dialogue with them. And in Dar es Salaam, for instance, and so it is almost 10 years after the Nairobi conference, they were quite numerous. And I think it was one of our main objectives, and I am quite happy for that. The last thing I would like to say, so we always have tried to work in equity manner, equitable manner. So I hope that we succeeded. And the objective also, in Nairobi in 2014, colleagues from western part of continent, the word I should say, West Europe and America, and colleagues from the continent, so from different regions of the continent, we were quite in balance. But more and more in Yaoundé in 2022, we could see that more African colleagues were involved, and I should say, and especially from Cameroon, who really took this conference à bras le corps. I don't know how to say that in good English. And then in Dar es Salaam, I just saw that the colleagues from Europe and were in minority, and that thanks also to all the work by Nianto and his colleague, I could feel myself that the colleagues from the continent really took up the issue, and the objective is to put this at the heart of their universities now. So I don't know if I am replying to Christian, but we have always worked in this spirit, and I hope we will do more and more. And of course, we are be happy to welcome more colleagues from Italy.
Hervé, do you have some comment? It's okay. Okay. Yeah, thank you. So, any more questions or comments? Yeah, please.
Right. No, I have two questions. The first one is for Abdelrahim. It's since you mentioned Kisimayo and Merca and the need to refuel, so the question is, where would they refuel? And then if you have more information about that, because it's clearly that Merca, Brava, and Kisimayo were very important for Baragash at that time. So they were refurbished, reconstructed, the forts, so there was something important, as we have been, kind of interacting the mail, but I would like to know if you had some more things. And I think that the Arabic sources on this kind of Indian Ocean issues are very interesting because none have been working on those before. So the different views is absolutely interesting to compare. And I haven't understood if for Marie-Pierre and Hervé, I wondered, so you have a new project, you're going to have funds that for people that ask for funds. I've not been understood well that, if that is what is going to happen. Okay, that for now.
Yeah.
And any other question or comments? Yeah, please. Please.
Yeah. My question for you, actually it may be related with the question of empire. I met a source, it is an Nahda newspaper. I don't know if you are aware of it. It is supported by Sultan Margash, and it is produced by Louis Sabuncu. And in this journal, I have met a very interesting thing. It is the first Zanzibar national anthem. Do you know about it? It is one of the chapters of my PhD thesis, because I have searched a lot and I didn't see much reference to if there is any Zanzibar national anthem produced by the Omani sultans. It is said that actually it is very, very much almost the same with the British anthem. And it is said that, or I mean maybe just thought, after Sultan Bargash visited Britain, he was very much influenced by the ceremonies and the national anthems and everything. There. So after he came back from there, he asked Louis Sabuncu to write, its words, and then later it was, it became a national anthem of Zanzibar Sultanate. So I really wonder if you have any information or any reference in your sources about it. I have the words, I have the full verse of it, yes, and I wrote a chapter on it actually in my PhD works. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Diana? Yeah.
So thank you for all presentations, but I remembered I have a question for Ms. Beatrice Nicolini. You were actually let's say, the single person in this conference to have talked about Global South. And this is a concept that interests me very much. I wanted to ask you about how much related is the idea of Global South, the position that maybe the African continent, but mostly in this case the eastern part of the continent, the perception, the relation between historical roots or cultural roots, and if these cultural roots are more important, more relevant for the past or for the present interests. So I would like to know your opinion and your perspective on this idea of Global South, how much it is related with the past. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So who's gonna first? You, okay, yes.
So first, the question of Professor Francesca Deklich. So the letter that I shown from Baraj to his wali in Lamu is part of an edited volume by Sultan al-Qasimi that has come out recently, and where there are lots of outward letters from Marash and concerning the Banadir. But unfortunately, I don't think that there is the answer to a question in this volume, and I haven't found it anywhere else yet. But maybe I'll be able to answer you in a year or two. I don't know. And in the same edited volume, Said Barash also sent letters to Luis Sabunji, whom you referenced, Professor Ur. About the Zanzibar national anthem, the little I know is what I read in your PhD thesis. So I don't think I would be able to tell you more about it. But I have two sub-answers, though. In 1834, when Said Said tried to broker an alliance with Rana Varomanzaka of Madagascar, Malagasy embassy came to Zanzibar, and they had to listen to the Omanis playing music, and they described it as playing the God Save the Queen. What I'm not able to understand is, did they call all anthem God Save the Queen, and for them it was the same thing, or did the Omani actually play the God Save the Queen? And I'm not able to answer that. About the European influence on Said Barash after his trip to England, France, and Portugal, and Egypt, yes, it is very much present. And I'm working on this European influence because of this trip, and also on the Ottoman influence, and especially Egyptian Ottoman influence on Said Barash. And for instance, I found in London an archive by George Percy Badger, and he said that he designed the new Zanzibar national emblem. So. I would love that.
Yeah.
Hervé?
Yes, I would like to respond to the question of Francesca. I think so. Huh? Yes, it is a project. It is a project because after 10 years of work by the academics about concerning the issue of slavery and post-slavery in East Africa, it is a proposal to establish a current state of research and focusing on the East Africa. It will be a good step, a good stage to have like a photograph about the research, and by the colleagues, and by the result of the work of the network, like SlavNet.
Yeah, and if I can add, so this is a Hervé initiative that I really thank. And so the idea is really to take stock of the situation and the research that have been done for about 10 years now within SlavNet network, but not only, and also to highlight all the results, the research done by our African colleagues from the East Africa and Western Indian Ocean. So we will have some funds from the GIS Études Africaines, but then we still have Francesca to think about how to continue our efforts, and of course we will look for other fundings. And I sincerely apologize to have not been with you. It was too complicated for me.
Okay. Well, yes, this is a huge topic. You know, in Europe, we have this idea of the necessity of labeling everything, of defining, of closing in order to control. So even when you talk about the global south, is something that is perceived always as Eurocentric. I mean, it's a vision that as Europeans we pretend to baptize in order to control it. And there are, I mean, thousands of examples. But then going on working in Italian and European universities, mainly on Western sources, and this conference is very much important because it's opening to extra-European sources, which is something for the Indian Ocean absolutely difficult, because there are so many languages, there are so many difficulties in order to find them, is trying to reverse the perception of the same event, of the same region, in order to study it from the other side as much as possible. Because after all, I mean, when we are talking about, for example, the role of this word empire, this is a very political issue even today. So the way to try to modify the methodology of research, the way to modify the perspective, it's a very, I mean, also deep and suffering route, but must be taken, because otherwise you have what we have. I don't know if you're aware, for example, in this country now we have this Piano Mattei. This is a huge government project. But if you look at it, you see that inside is totally empty. Because the idea is simply naming with a nice kind of label, because Mattei was a very important and charismatic figure in the history of the Italian country, in order to prosecute the same behavior, that is business agreements, ignoring local realities, and so on and so on. So what we have to deal with is both with European realities, Western realities in general, and local realities. And then you have so many situations that could become even embarrassing. I just make you an example and I stop myself. In the past, I received a request by an Omani minister, and he wanted to know which kind of possessions were in this famous Omani Empire along the East African coast. I mean, he wanted somebody to say, this was yours. And this idea of the private property in what we decided to call the Global South, it's a huge political and economic issue. Because the perception of what is yours is not belonging to this region. It has been introduced by the Western presence. So this could cause also political struggles in terms of claimings, which are huge now with regards to this region.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much. Now we all woke up very well after such a stimulating session. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much for all of the people that are attending online and also participated online. Unfortunately, Sanso Makelela did not connect, and we are very sorry because we were really eager to hear his presentation, but he has not been able to connect from Tanzania. And just the last comment, I was really amazed by the Dar es Salaam conference. Was, I think, very, very interesting because organized in Africa, almost all people and intellectuals were from Africa, and three projects of the European Union together, they decided they just prefer to have something done there, and also with the summer school, so I thought it was a great place.
Yeah. Really great.
Yeah, yeah. And just to say where we are going today, the cafe is not up there on the second, but is on a bar, and
Yes.
Sylvia will tell you where. And
Before
Sylvia.
going, I distributed this coupon that you have to explain. Yeah. Yeah, we change cafe today. You just follow me and we go together. But before going, please take the coupon that you have to show at the coffee bar to have the cappuccino or coffee and yeah, yes.
Okay, let's go.
Merci beaucoup.
us who are here in Urbino really enjoy the sun and the cafe outside, so it's difficult. But today is Saturday, and that is the reason why we are a little late, but we can start. Can you, Rufus, are you there? You will be the first.
Yes,
because
I'm
Elcidio
here.
hasn't appeared yet.
I'm here.
Can
you
you
hear me?
stop talking, Rufus? Can you? Do you have something to share, like do you want? Rufus, você quer mostrar algo, alguma coisa na pantalla?
Sim.
Can you hear us, Rufus? Pode ouvir?
Yes, I can hear perfectly.
Não ouvimos muito. Pode um pouco mais forte?
Yeah, I can hear you perfectly.
Okay, thank you,
Can you
Rufus.
hear me now?
So, silent, please. Rufus, the first speaker, is there, so let's please let him start. So, the word is up to you, Rufus. Thank you very much. Rufus Makuluve from Maputo will present a paper, A Sonic Approach to Vernacular Archives and Cultural Memory of Fishing Communities of the Mozambican Islands.
First of all, I want to say thank you for this opportunity to be able to share some of the things that I do, some of the ideas that I do as a researcher, and it's such a privilege to be part of such a forum with diverse approaches to the subjects related to the Indian Ocean. Well, my name is Rufus Makuluve. I am a musician by profession, but also I do some research. I'll start a bit with the background on how I came to this idea. As a sound person myself, I have always been interested in how sound relates to our daily lives. How is sound part of our daily life? So, having been to many places, including Ilha de Mozambique, I started also at the same time through my studies in acoustomology, looking on how polluted is the island. Because as I was listening to the island, I could hear lots of sounds, human-made, machine-made, and of course natural sounds also, which made me think that maybe there's a lot going on in terms of pollution. So I'll start with just to give you a taste of what type of work do I do. I'll start with a quick sound walk, because also as a researcher, I use sound as my main source of getting into people or into the subjects. So I'll start with maybe, let me see if you can you hear the sound? I'm not sure. Let me see. Please, can you hear the sound? Can someone
We
confirm?
can't hear it. When you share the media, you have to tick the sound. Huh? Yes, when you share the screen, you have to share the sound, condividir o sonido nas opções.
Well, I can't find it for now. Then I'll go directly into the presentation itself. I wanted to share a bit of the sound, but I'm being a victim of technology. So okay, I'll share my my presentation. Can you see it on the screen?
Right, yes,
Is it
we
there?
can.
Okay. As I said, I started looking at the archives as sources of cultural memory because, but not the normal traditionally written or archives, but more on the vernacular archives. Vernacular archives meaning the memories that are within the people, all sorts of memory, including the oral traditions. So it was in a context where there's looking at the Mozambican island or at the whole Indian Ocean coast or at the Mozambican coast in general, you see that there's a lot of diverse cultural history, which is also shaped by different interactions, mostly by oceanic mobilities, and recently by all sorts of modern mobility. I know this thing of mobility was heftily discussed yesterday, that there's mobility at all levels. But here I'm looking at the, let's say, 14th century, 12th century, now on, let's say, up to the 19th century mobility, which in a way has shaped some of the cultural habits, practices, and stuff. And also, it's a home of fishing communities which are deeply connected to the ocean and with distinct cultural practices and knowledge that has been passed across generation. And then also, I thought that this intersection of vernacular archives, cultural memory, and music, sound in this community is one area that remains quite unstudied. Then I started also questioning myself, why should I go for the sonic sources? I must say that firstly, to look at the sonic sources as this rich repositories of grassroots repositories of vernacular archives and memories. And also, it's a way of also challenging dominant practices. And also add into this one dominant research agenda. Because if you go to the Mozambican island, I think it's a place where a lot of research has been done and it's still being done, but it's most of it is looking into the more traditional way of doing things. I don't want to go into the colonial words, but somewhere around that sphere. And also at the same time, I also wanted to see what's the role of the sound in preserving collective stories, because there is lots of collective stories which are used are shared through sounds, and also as a way of amplifying marginalized voices of fishermen and Shokolo women through their text and subtext. Because you will see that when people go to Ilha de Moçambique, they will mostly look at tufu as a performative practice, but not looking at this other. There's a lot more than tufu at the Mozambican island. Then also as a source of reading the environment, which was the audio I was trying to play with very little success, whereby I can, through geophony, I can read the tides and the winds and all other different sonic sources which can help us to read the environment. This is a picture of me working with Shokolo women. Shokolo women, it's mostly, it's all women who do free diving to collect different sorts of mollusks. They do free diving, which is quite interesting. And through this free diving, going up, in and out, they sing. They have lots of songs that they're singing. Then I thought this was very interesting to record and study it. My approach has been an immersive field work, mostly sonic ethnography and walking, whereby through sound, I use sound as my entry point to the sources. And my data collection has been recording 360 degrees and also stereo, supported by interviews, and through that also read the soundscapes, the music, and the sonic practices and perceptions, because sometimes we might perceive a sound from as an outsider. I might perceive a sound in one way, while the member of the community perceives the sound in a very different way. And also, the approach is also capture intangible aspects and sensory dimensions, because as researchers, we tend to forget that there are sensory dimensions. And being in this field work, I understood that there's also a lot of sensory dimensions other than what you can read and write. This is also another day on a boat, going to the high sea with fishermen, recording their songs. My initial findings is that the narratives are quite interesting, and they touch on all different subjects, or from the more historical perspective and more into the daily life. Songs like Salamama, which have meaning, the direct meaning is that come, sit, and rest. They can also mean other things more than what you can read on the lyric itself. Interesting is that also these fishermen and the Shokolo women are very also connected into the daily politics, also even global agendas, because they even have songs about the relationship between America and Bin Laden, and all sorts of other characters of what I would call contemporary history. It was also possible to find intangible aspects which are engaging with the sensory dimensions, like the wind and tide reading by Nahotas. It goes beyond what you can see. It also goes into what you can feel, into what you can hear, and sometimes into what you can smell, which in the academia, it's quite difficult to put it in paper. I was spent a lot of time with Mestre Daoud, reading winds, which are connected to the monsoon. Of course, they have their own, the local names, like Epeho, Sawatulu, Okusi, Kachikasi, Olani, Mamte, and the list goes on. And through cross source reading, it was possible to see that the Kachikasi, it also has its origin on the Arabic language. There is a relation. It's a certain type, a certain wind, monsoon wind, which was the one that was bringing people from Oman all the way into the Isla de Mozambique. It was also through this reading possible to also interact with what I would call the imaginary or the magic world, where one Nahota is the master of the sea. He's a fisherman, but he's not just a fisherman. He's able to read a number of natural phenomena, wind, tides, and whatever. So one of the most famous Nahota, who's now a madman, he was also sharing his story that he married Mpua. Mpua would be the equivalent to mermaid in English. And it was interesting to talk with him and understand how this Mpua made him so wealthy, according to his telling. And at the same time, this Mpua was the most beautiful woman he has ever seen. And at the same time, she was a shapeshifter. So yeah, it's quite interesting. And as I mentioned, going to the sound readings of the Ilya, you end up finding a lot more than what you see on the surface. These are some of the mollusks that are collected by Shokolo women. And also this was another group of Shokolo that we were working with. I could say a lot more, but I will stop here and say thank you.
Thank you very much, Makuluve. Rufus, you must know that Rufus is a very well-known musician in Mozambique also, so just... And now the word goes to Patricia Ferraz, unless Elcidio Rui Makwakwa is there? No, then. So, Patricia, thank you.
Hello. Hello, Francesca. Can I share my screen?
Yes, of course.
Are you see my screen?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So, good morning to all. Thank you for the opportunity to present my work in this interesting conference. I am an anthropologist and a research fellow at the Institute of Social Sciences of the University of Lisbon in Portugal. And my topics are the anthropology of colonialism, racism, history of anthropology, and production of scientific knowledge. I hope this presentation, inspired by representations on Macau and on mechanisms and their mobility, can bring elements to our discussion. What allows this reflection is the history of the Portuguese colonial empire, the discrimination and representations produced, and some of the consequences of this context in the present, and how aspects that are related to this past and with the language can serve to put people in contact, or how the existence of some of these elements can be seen as strategic in some contexts, both in China and in Africa as in Europe. One of the elements that allows or facilitates this mobility since ancient times is water, or its proximity. And that was my starting point for this reflection. Water, more than just a geographical barrier, can be a privileged means of communication, as well as a means of circulation for people, things, and resources. The location chosen is Macau in its relations with China and the Lusophone world. The occupation of Macau began in the mid-16th century with a gradual occupation by Portuguese sailors. Since its establishment, the city of Macau, strategically positioned on the southeast coast of China and extending towards the western region of Pearl River Delta, has been connected to the development of a worldwide network and gained its position as a crossover spot of interests, populations, religions, and cultures. Macau was a significant trading post serving the trade relations between China, Japan, India, and Europe for more than a century, until the Dutch and the British took over the trading routes when Hong Kong under British administration would eventually replace it. Macau became part of the Portuguese Overseas Administration framework by royal decree in 1844. In 1845, Portugal declared the city a free trading harbor. Macau was the center for the activities of the Catholic missions in China and Japan, with the first Jesuit church and school built there in the early 17th century. By living in relative isolation from the Portuguese metropolis between the 16th and 19th centuries, The Macanese developed the local Creole culture by incorporating several influences they received from Eastern Asia's maritime world. By doing so, they were able to retain their lifestyle, traditions, language, gastronomy, and professions traditionally associated with the local government. Macau is a complex space from a historical point of view and in its current framework. It is a border city dependent on the balance between different political forces and has suffered several transformations in the last few decades. Further, it is marked by its ethnical complexity. While the inhabitants of Macau included many people from South Asia, Malayans, Japanese, Indians, Timorese, and even Africans, a Portuguese-speaking Catholic society was formed after the Portuguese arrived. Over time, this led to the emergence of the Macanese, a population that was fundamentally Portuguese, but which retained local characteristics. A Creole culture was therefore born with its own dialect, patois, and also its own institutions and gastronomy. However, throughout time, this space also included a Chinese population and a local Creole population that can be differentiated based on two features. The fact that they are subjects of the King of Portugal and also Catholic. In the middle of the 19th century, there was a movement of indentured labor in the context of the Portuguese Empire, especially of Chinese and Indian men in the Indian and Atlantic worlds. The migration of contract workers, widely identified with the figure of the coolie, constituted one of the largest movements of work around the world after the end of the slave trade in 1807 and the abolition of slavery in 1833 in the British Empire. Like slavery and other forms of forced labor, the contract labor was a reflection of global inequalities which resulted in the prevalence of hierarchical power relations, as well as various types of exploitation, restriction of rights, and racial exclusion. These workers generally agree with the initial terms of their contract, but are unable to end or change its duration after it begins. Besides, some forms of coercion, such as poverty, debt, or imminent imprisonment, are necessary to get individuals to agree to this type of contract. English, Americans, French, Spanish, and Portuguese were all heavily involved in the export of Asian labor. These workers flourished at a time when large landowners were not able to handle free labor and demanded workers reliable and cheap after abolition. Regarding Macau, the emigration under contract related to the so-called coolies was according forced labor historically constituted in the Indian world, which diverged from the modern Western notion of slavery. On the other hand, the Portuguese government was also concerned about allocating these workers within the borders of the empire, as is clear in the massive use of workers from Angola and in the brief experience of Chinese coolies on the cocoa plantations in São Tomé and Príncipe, in addition to attempts to colonize specific areas. Several laws and decrees were produced on the work of the indigenous population, which associated the obligation of work with the civilizing mission. In the context of the condemnation of slave trade and the imminent abolition of slavery, contract labor seemed to present a natural path in the name of the civilizing mission and modern economic exploitation of the Portuguese colonial empire. The relationships established in contracts were connected to the idea that everyone, especially the colonized populations, should work. Since the late 19th century, the Portuguese administration settled gradually and the Macanese, intending to maintain the privilege that distinguished them from the Chinese community, were forced to minimize their Creole culture and to incorporate elements of Portuguese culture. Therefore, their Creole tongue became mainly a household language that disappeared in less than a century. Its gastronomy, one of the most ancient examples of fusion cooking in the world, survived only in some families and on rare occasions. The Chinese movements against the foreign presence in Macau and Hong Kong intensified after the Second World War, mainly with the proclamation of the China Popular Republic in 1949. Its ambivalence is therefore marked by the Macanese identity. The Macanese are a community that results from a long inclusion and exclusion process that evolved based on external conditions. Its borders also remained undefined and diffuse between different social universes. Based on Macau's history, its relationship with the Portuguese colonial empire, and the challenges facing the Macanese identity today, I analyzed representations of Macau and the Macanese in the periodical press and exhibitions during the first half of the 20th century. In the context of the Portuguese colonial exhibition in Porto in 1934, people from the colonies, including Macanese, were brought to the then metropolis. Some of them were depicted in postcards. This exhibition included the Macau Street, in which a pavilion with the same name was installed to serve as tea room. An orchestra of Chinese musicians played in that pavilion. The Porto Colonial Parade at the end of the Portuguese colonial exhibition included the Macau float. Social sophistication and elegance were recognized in the natives of Macau and India, as opposed to the natives of the other overseas territories. On the other hand, we may infer that the visitors to the exhibition appreciated the music played by the Chinese orchestra more than the African drumming, the so-called batuques. Macau was also included in the colonial session of the 1940 Lisbon exhibition of the Portuguese world. To present Macau, a street was built with elements such as restaurants, and it incorporated individuals performing woodcrafts, for example, in an attempt to reproduce the Macanese way of life. The street had the Macau Pavilion, shops, a lottery house, Fantan, a traditional game, a temple, a pagoda, and a house. Overall, the colors used were gaudy and mainly scarlet. These representations partially remind us of what Edward Said called Orientalism, that is, the translation of how the West idealized the East in several domains, from literature to science and art. In the report elaborated by the person who accompanied the Macanese during the trip, we note that one female singer and attendant, two coolie carters who doubled as bankers in Fantan, and three Campo Road carvers were chosen to take part in the exhibitions. According to him, only three of the artisans and coolies spoke Portuguese. Besides, the journal was not a peaceful one. And in the report, he writes this. On their arrival in Hong Kong, the representation was installed in horrific conditions on board the ship that was taking them to the Dutch Indies. The tickets bought for them in Lisbon were deck tickets, which did not entitle them to a bunk. As the passengers were not indigenous, of primitive and rudimentary civilization, but rather people accustomed to everyday conveniences, it was necessary to find a solution to the matter. The singer and their attendant were given berths in second class, and the men were berthed in a section of part of the old equips with the newly purchased camp beds. One is therefore able to see that there were significant differences in the universe of the individuals belonging to the territories administered by Portugal, according to their origin and social level. In other words, if these people had originated from African territories, there would probably have been no effort made to improve their accommodation during the journey. During this exhibition, several photos of Macanese were passed around on postcards that, on the one hand, exalted the beauty of the women, while on the other, using language of types that sought to identify human variabilities at the phenotypical level. Not only in the postcard captions, but also in the exhibition's catalog, we realized that it is mainly the tests that offered stereotypes of Macau's inhabitants. For example, the catalog organized by Henrique Galvão, who was in charge of the colonial section, states that in Macau the homogeneity of slanting eyes prevailed, although there was a multiplicity of Chinese types, from the eye stature and clear skin of the northern Chinese to the shorter and darker southern type.
3 minutes. 2 minutes.
What?
2 minutes more.
Okay. So this is other presentation of Macau in Little People's Portugal in Coimbra. And here the interior of the Macau pavilion, where we find elements that, opposed to what we see in the African pavilions, suggest another stage of civilization and acculturation. Here I will explain that, on the contrary of African, in Macau, these cities were the respect between the difference between two different civilizations. Here I will speak. I would speak on the Macau in imperial propaganda, to say that Angola and Mozambique, the two settlement colonies, are given greater prominence compared to Macau or Timor, for example. But despite the exotical and different character often attributed to Macau, it bears several recognized elements of Portuguese culture. The Sino-Portuguese Joint Declaration for the Future of Macau, signed in 1987, began the negotiations between the Portuguese and Chinese authorities and was marked by a close cooperation and smooth transition of the final overseas territory under Portuguese administration. Based on that document, and like events in Hong Kong, the Macau Special Administrative Region was created with a certain degree of political autonomy, a local government, and its own legal framework, the Basic Law, allowing for the continuation of the legal, social, and cultural systems operating during Portuguese administration until 2049, including retaining Portuguese as a second official language. Nowadays, Lusophony is primarily promoted in Macau through such initiatives as the Lusophonia Festival by the Macau Special Administrative Region and Portuguese-speaking countries Theatre Festival. In 2003, the Forum for Economic and Trade Cooperation between China and Portuguese-speaking countries, known as Forum Macau, was created. It was an initiative of the Chinese central government in coordination with 7 Portuguese-speaking countries: Angola, Brazil, Cape Verde, Guinea-Bissau, Mozambique, Portugal, and East Timor, and with the collaboration of the Macau Special Administrative Region government. São Tomé e Príncipe joined the group in 2017. There is also the Cultural Week, where Macau is described as cultural exchange platform between China and Portuguese-speaking countries, bringing together local artists and artists from those countries, as well as other personalities in the cultural field. Some of those invited took part in shows, while others showcased their gastronomic skills or their talent in art or in crafts.
Conclusion.
To conclude, while studying the representations of the territories under Portuguese colonial administration, it is clear that Macau enjoyed a privileged status in that setting, particularly in comparison with the depictions of African territories and African territories and Timor. The so-called customs and practices of Macau were seen as both original and born of a meeting of several cultures. There is a new generation of Macanese that identifies less with the Portuguese culture and that has begun to cultivate a new identity discourse. During the transition period, both Portugal and China launched a campaign celebrating Macau's glorious past and recreating this land as a unique space in China, as a product and a symbol of cooperation and cultural sharing between the East and the West. This heritage was promoted in museums, folklore societies, and other bodies that are developing an education role in the process of building the Macau Special Administrative Region. So, the current context in China
Can you please
seeks to
wrap
open
up?
up to the entire world, sometimes precisely through Macau, also exploring its relations with Portugal and with the Portuguese-speaking countries, mainly in Africa, former Portuguese colonies, is good for thinking about colonial and the colonial perspectives, current challenge in terms of shared heritage, language, power strategies, cultural relations, and labor, with the employment in the past and today of many Chinese workers in Angola and Mozambique, for example, under migration conditions that are often difficult and which deserve our attention. You may find more information about my work in these two books, The Colors of the Empire, Racialized Representation During Portuguese Colonialism, and Anthropology, Nationalism, and Colonialism. Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia. Now, thank you very much. The word is to Ute Fendler from Bayreuth.
Yes, hello. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak at your conference, although I was not able to come. I think you can see my screen, and then let's start right away. What I'm going to present today is part of a larger project, Multiple Artworks, Multiple Indian Ocean, and you will find more information on the site of Africa Multiple University of Bayreuth. With the most recent turn in humanities towards the ocean as a method and blue humanities, concepts like fluidity, tidalactics, and polyrhythm shift the foci towards the complex and changing connections across the Indian Ocean. This paper will take these concepts as a starting point to suggest a corpus of artworks created by artists from Goa, Mozambique, Mauritius, and La Réunion that all explore the close interdependence of history and the oceanic tides that allow and force migration of people, goods, and cultures. I would like to go back to Shante Murthy and Ashraf Jamal, who suggested first steps towards an Indian Ocean poetics, as the area is constantly in circulation and recirculation, in flux, suppliant and yet enormously resilient, they say, that offers the possibility for new imaginative conjunctures. As an analytical frame for this presentation, I would like to pick up the idea of imaginative conjunctures and would like to combine it with the concept of tidalactics and polyrhythm. In the first step, I would like to refer to the Jamaican poet, so we go to the other ocean, poet Kamau Brathwaite's concept of dialectics, as it is directly inspired by the presence of the ocean. It strengthens the ideas of movement and the connection between land and sea in a continuous and always changing movement. The curator and scholar Stephanie Hessler quotes a poem by Brathwaite to highlight the performative quality of the text. And I quote, that's what you see here on the screen. It takes me back and drags me dialectic into this tangled, urgent meaning to and fro, like foam, saltless as from the bottom of the sea, dragging our meaning, our moaning, song from Calabar along the sea floor with pebble sound and conch and wound and sea sound moon. That was taken from the poem, and then she continues, in this passage, the movement of water and bodies towards and from the shore is tangled and cannot be thought apart. This worldview comes from the oceans, with their surfaces across which migration and trade, including the atrocities of the slave trade, took place over centuries. As much as in their depths, where a myriad of aquatic creatures reside, where light breaks differently and where sound travels 4 times faster than through air. End of quote. I quoted Hessler with a certain length, as her articles based on curational practices and arts, which allows me to connect the approaches from literary and cultural studies with arts as a complementary method. For my first example, I would like to, I will turn towards Subodh Kherkar from Goa, who describes himself as an ocean artist, someone who is inspired by the ocean and who works next to and with the ocean. The anchor that you see here is an example for the work of the ocean. The anchor is covered by shells. The artist exhibits the artwork of the ocean, turning a utility object into one that has been completely absorbed by the ocean. The form of the anchor alone reminds the original object that has metamorphosed into a colony of shells. The second piece that you see here is the torom, a piece of wood that is used to push the boat into the sea. This piece is used as the body of a rowing boat. Old Chinese spoons are placed in a row on each side, turning the old wood gliding support for boats into a boat itself that is driven by the mercantile force of trading between India and China. The artwork echoes the waves of historical migration and of the ocean. Besides the recreation of historical episodes by using oceanic objects, Kherkar works with performative installations. The series Fisherman, and here you see 2 examples of this series, is a performative work for which fishermen enact daily practices. They would gather on the beach in such a way that their bodies form the silhouette of a boat, what you see here on the left-hand side, performing the act of rowing or fishing. The other one connecting with the idea of the tides and the dialectic. The reenactment of daily practices and of oral history turned the human body into the medium of a communicative memory, of a shared and lived history. The concept of dialectic movement of the ocean could also be described by the concept of polyrhythm. And I just put it here together because it's also a lot about a shared imaginary and how certain tropes, iconic tropes, reappear in different contexts. In the search for definitions, I came across the rereadings of Senghor's writings on African arts by Suleiman Bashir Diagne and Babacar Mbaye Diop. Diagne uses one quote by Senghor to bring forth his central idea of rhythm and arts. And I quote, and you see the original in French on the bottom of the slide. What is rhythm? It is the architecture of being, the internal dynamism that gives it a form, the system of waves that emanates from it reaching out to the others. It is the pure expression of the vital force. Rhythm is the vibrating shock, the power that moves us deep down in our being via the senses. The rhythm expresses itself in using the most basic and material ways: lines, surfaces, colors, volumes in architecture, sculpture and painting, accents in poetry and music, movements and dance. But in doing so, rhythm arranges all these concrete things, giving it an orientation towards the light of the spirit. End of quote. Diagne underlines that Senghor has repeatedly written on the notion of rhythm in African arts. Central to this philosophy is also the invitation to accept various ways of understanding, as Senghor draws the attention to the fact that European philosophers would usually try to think about a question or a problem by identifying different aspects using the raison œil, the reason eye, which means the intellect keeping on and observing an analytical distance towards the object. Senghor suggests the approach of the raison étreinte, literally the apprehension by embracement. And I think we already have heard some of these examples yesterday. He describes this approach as an act of intuition that apprehends the other as a whole rather than in analytical pieces. The method would be to feel the flux of the other, is what he says, to dance rather than to think the question. According to Senghor, rhythm is inherent to everything, so that it is rhythm that affects the other, steers emotions and actions, which might very well connect to what Rufus was saying some minutes ago. My next example, that's I guess many of you might know, could also serve as an illustration for this concept of polyrhythm. The sculptor Pequiwa is from Maputo, Mozambique. As a large part of his oeuvre are sculptures using old boats and wooden pieces from the island of Mozambique. Using old boats or pieces of boats connects with the material history of the coastal regions that carry along the practices of sailing of encounters that last ever since pre-colonial times up to today. Pequiwa uses the boats as a sort of blackboard, a medium that he uses to write something down, to visualize oral history. He explains his objective to transmit stories of the past. And he says, to me, working on old objects is an encounter with the past, a form to preserve it, a canvas on which I can tell stories. It is almost an obligation to tell these lived experiences to the contemporary world. End of quote. The boats are a canvas for the painting as well as the paper for the writing. The figures that appear seem to stem from stories about the sea. They are silhouettes of fishes, figures that are part of the mystic universe of hybrid creatures, human faces. If you can have a look at two details, the left side of the boat carries two heads that almost seem to form one. The animal-like head is next to the back of the head of a human figure, as if one would chase the other, or both moving together as if they were one body. The upheavals beneath them seem to be waves, this part here, carrying the figures on their race through the water. From the other side, what we see on the right-hand side, the waves are the curly hair of a human head resting on branches and leaves, garden scenery. In this way, the two faces of the boat are complementary to each other, combining intimately the land and the sea, mystic and human figures. They are all bound together across time and space. The metallic plates that you see, for example, here and there, remind of glittering fish scales, but at the same time, they are anorganic fragments that connect wooden pieces that break open or apart. The shiny stitches seem to visualize the bondages between different spaces and epochs, but also steer references to painful stories of slave ships with iron chains and silver bullets. The pattern of the holes that pierce the planks of the boat create a paravent-like screen that protects the other side from being seen, as it allows to see parts of it through the holes. The structure is that of old wooden windows in Arabian style, so there are more echoes. The partial visual axis, sorry, that was too early. The partial visual axis creates a fragmented perception of the events taking place on the other side. Pequiwa's creation of a fragmented vision of the stories reminds us of the construction of history that draws on historical, visual, and material pieces to put a larger narrative together. The sculpture does not only carry the coastal history and the daily practices of fishing with it, it also tells the stories of the fishermen and the ghosts of the sea they have to struggle with or by whom they are supported. The boat allows us to connect with an artist from La Réunion, Jacques Banti. On the opening page of his website, we see the artist on a rock facing the ocean. The overlaid lines of a world map, and I added the one here on the left bottom, which is not on the website. The overlaid lines of a world map illustrate how the ocean connects the whole world, including the volcanic rock, the island, La Réunion. Once you open the page with the title, Where is the Body?, there's a soft sound of waves that accompany the observer as long as they discover the text and images on the site. I will pick two examples where he tries to grasp the invisible history of the slave trade, as well as of indentured laborers crossing the Kalapani from India to the islands and the East African coasts. The first work that you see here is a shape of a boat underground where bodies are standing close next to each other. The arrangement links directly to transportation of African bodies towards the plantation on the islands. The fact that all is underground reminds of an open grave at the moment of burying the dead bodies or when graves have to be reopened for investigation. Both moments implore the observer to discover hidden and suppressed historical events. The floor opens up to uncover buried memories almost in a literal way. The title, Land of Abolition, Freedom, what was again in English, Freedom for Ebony Wood, which directly links again to the African body, adds the note of commemoration that opens up a perspective towards the future as it speaks of the abolition of slavery. The second work, entitled Au fil de la mémoire, Memory Lane, is a variation on the same theme. The open space, like a grave, bodies wrapped in a sort of a burial gown made of vegetal fibers. The heads of the cotton figures are connected to nylon cords, the memory lanes. They are almost invisible, but they seem to be the connection between the burial ground and the living world and give a sort of a comment on the link of the living with the dead. A similar approach, and I'm rushing a little bit through, but a similar approach can be found in some works of the Mauritian artist Nevada Alec. This work is inspired by the 18th century carving of a slave ship that we have already seen in other presentations.
You have 2 minutes.
Yeah, I'm almost through. Thank you. And the tapestry that embellished the walls of the governor's mansion, the cloth of Louis. Okay, maybe I just... What is interesting here that she connects those two images. She brings in also the flagellation of the slave, which is usually not there on these trolls, on this cloth, and they are also the names of the slave holders. So she brings together then the official history and the hidden history of the slave boats. Another example, as we have to rush a little bit, Krishna Lakshman, Ancestral Encounters, where you can see, which is interesting also, again, the cargo room, but placed under the surface of the water, so that this scenery refers most notably to the drowned persons and the bodies thrown overboard, and connects them between the slave trade as well as with migration waves in contemporary times. Yeah, I just put them together. We see some continuity. Let me come to my last two examples to show that there is not only this history of slavery. One of the examples is Yara Costa, who lives on the island of Mozambique, and she has a very interesting installation of a boat with VR experience. Unfortunately, I couldn't see it myself, so I just saw something online. The opening page, what you see on the left-hand side, says, hop on a dhow and sail through the age-old maritime culture of the island of Mozambique that now finds itself at the risk of drowning. So she combines collected histories, oral histories and songs, and I guess Rufus knows about this work, as well, so that you can emerge into the sounds and the effects and also the movements of the boat and the sea. And the last one, an ongoing project that we started a couple of years ago together with some artists from Mozambique. You see Luis Sala, a choreographer and dancer, and we started with a performance, with a film, bringing it together with the sculptures and music to create, let's say, an ongoing and growing project on polyrhythmic gestures on the coast to the Indian Ocean. And I will close here for the moment. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Now, is there anybody with questions coming up about the presentation? I have one question for the start for Rufus about the methodology to elicit information from the fishermen and from other people. I mean, I've been interested in eliciting oral sources and knowing that oral sources that just come in when you talk about certain things or you do certain celebrations. I thought this is an interesting methodology, so I don't know if he can tell us something more about, but in the meanwhile, let's see if there are other questions before I give the word to the speakers. Voice.
Now it's okay? Yes. Sorry. Thank you very much. I have a question to Rufus and to Ute. The first question is common. Regarding the investigations of sounds and music, and you have also talked about some activism, political ideas, political expression into music. I wanted to ask you if you have seen, or which is the relation between the frequency of sounds and the repetition that is often present in songs, with this expression, if there is a link, and how do you see it? And my second question, which is particularly for Ms. Ferraz, about having investigated the images that are present in exhibitions, particularly I refer to your case of the colonial exhibition. As I see, but I might be wrong, as I see in the exhibitions, especially in that period, it is present a certain will to show only what the power would like to show. So how did you, in your work, in your research, how did you separate the things of the image and the real information that came through, and the knowledge production that was disseminated like this? Thank you.
This is a question for Rufus. You lived in Mozambique, and I was wondering if you might be able to speak to how that has maybe influenced the way in which people are listening, hearing sounds, if it changed their listening experience or their sensorial experience of living on the island.
Excuse me, I didn't hear it properly. I think if you could speak a bit louder.
Yeah, I'll speak. Is this better? Okay.
Yes.
Great. I was wondering if you could speak more about noise pollution. You mentioned it briefly, but I'm curious if people talked about how noise pollution had affected their sensorial experience or their listening practices on the island. Thank you.
Other question? Otherwise, we go for the first round of answers. Answers, please. Rufus and Ute, I think.
Okay. I'll try and respond to some of the questions that were put specifically for me. Well, when it comes to the methodology, well, there was a challenge to, elicit a bit more and to say, when do the people talk more about it and how to approach it, the whole thing around the methodology. Well, I must say that, as I said, it's a sonic ethnography, which means when I'm on the field, I do my best to listen more as much as possible. My questions are just a provocation to start the conversation. And from there, I try to guide also my listening based a bit on what I'm hearing. It's quite taxing because you have to go there a number of times and you have to record and listen to it and go back. But I think it's interesting because this methodology is also a combination of what several people have done before, like the Canadian Soundscape Project. People like, well, there's a number of scholars who have used sound as the entry point, listening to the environment. People like Angela Impey, who are listening to the environment, whereby we choose to listen to the environment, meaning the geophony, the anthropophony, the biophony. Geophony being how the place sounds like, the anthropophony being technophony is also included. Some scholars will say it's technophony because it's man-made sounds that also have influence on the environment. And biophony as the animals or the living biological beings of the area, except humans. At the same time, also answering the third question about the noise pollution. Because what it said is that whenever we are in an environment, we should have as many low natural sounds of that environment, of that specific environment. Like now, when I go to Ilha de Moçambique, there's lots of the what they call Indian crows, corvus ablus, which are very much present in the environment, but they are not part of that specific environment. It's the same with the motorbikes. There's a paper which I've already published, which speaks more about that, which is called The Soundscapes of Omuhipiti. I can share the link on the chat, then probably you can access it, which speaks more into how the environment is polluted, meaning that mainly the crows and the motorbikes, which are really the big polluters of the island. And also the community, the people who live in the island, their listening experience has changed a lot, and they are so annoyed by these new sounds, particularly the older generation. The younger ones are happy if their motorbike is really loud, like they even take out parts of the I don't know the term in English, the exhaust, in order to make it sound as loud as possible. Then there's of course a conflict, a generational conflict. On the political expression and the frequency of sound and repetition, this is very interesting because I think there's politics in all songs. This is what I will say, because if I'm a man, I'm not happy with whatever my partner is doing, I can hum a song. Then it starts on the home politics, like at home, at the very basic level where we share a bed and I start whistling a certain song. Then it can go to the next level. When there were municipal elections in Ilha, people told the leaders, like, we are here to welcome you. It was a TUF group. I hope Helen is listening to this. A TUF group said, yeah, we will put you in power, but if you forget about us, we'll take you out. So then you go to the next level, which also goes into international politics. Well, I'm still at the very early stage of analysis of the content that I have, because it's quite a lot. I have hours and hours and hours of sound, but I could see that when I went to visit Mestre Daoud, who's an ahota, and his wife told me, no, sometimes when he misbehaves, I can sing something and he will understand that I'm not happy with him. So it's not only at the political level, it's also at very domestic politics, where a song, a hum could voice a satisfaction and not being satisfied by a certain situation. Yeah, I think I'll stop here for now. Thank you.
Was there a question for Uday?
Actually, I had the impression that all these questions were for Rufus and not really for me, but maybe I misunderstood.
Let's get another round of questions. Jill?
But there was a question for Patricia.
Yes, I think that was a question for me, and thank you for the question.
Yeah.
So, thank you for the question. In fact, there is a tension between what the power want to show at the exhibitions and the reality. So, in this period, in the 30s and the 40s in Portugal, we had a dictatorship. And these exhibitions want to spread the success of the colonization on the one hand, and on the other hand, the much work that needs to do. So this kind of propaganda, postcards and posters and photographs want to show what the political power want to show. But for example, I show some postcards of the Mechanism people. They were chosen to come to the metropolis to sing, to play instruments, to do manual work. But some of them didn't spoke Portuguese. So if we think about that, maybe the Portuguese colonization wasn't so success, or wasn't so success as they want to show. So there is a tension, and I thank you for the question, between the reality and this propaganda. This is not only the case of Portugal, but also France and British Empire and so on. And I explain this better in my book if you want to learn more on exhibitions. And I also organized a special issue on this. And I like this topic of the exhibitions because they allows us not only to understood the political power, the history of different colonial empires, but also the production of scientific knowledge. And in this context, anthropology have a great importance, because when we have these exhibitions, and exhibitions are different from fairs. Fairs have a more economic and industrial objective, and the exhibitions have an education objective. And parallel to these exhibitions, there are always congresses and of anthropology and other scientific disciplines where the specialists will present the knowledge that they have or not have on these populations. And after these exhibitions, many museums were created. So if you want to learn more, please look for more information. This topic is very interesting to understand all these contradictions and tensions on the colonial empires. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? Jill has another question.
This is a comment sort of inspired by Rufus. I think back over the last day or two, we've had quite a few clips of film of display and therefore we've recorded it. It's incidental stuff that I think it would be lovely to record much more than we do. The sound of the monsoon, for the start. If you've heard the monsoon at full pelt at certain times of year, or down, so it's an incredibly like that more. And the other thing, I think it was in Bernard's presentation, there was a man who used to work on a boat who talked about the songs, the work songs they used to sing as they were moving the ropes, moving the sails and so on. That kind of stuff we've got to record. It won't be there forever. The boats will disappear and those songs and work songs will disappear. So recording. I was really inspired by Rufus reminding us that incidental sound is just as important as formal dances, presentation, and so on. So just a little comment.
Any other question? I had a very short question about indentured labor from Chinese in Angola and Mozambique, like bringing people from Asia to work as indentured labor. Short, because you have something else to show on the for Patricia. Anybody else's comments, questions? So just this for Patricia.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Yes. The idea of the indentures laborers from China brought to Angola and Mozambique, which kind of labor were they performing, if you know?
Oh, okay. So my research was referring a type of contract or indentured labor after slavery, okay? In the middle of the 19th century. And there are documents in the Overseas Historical Archive in Lisbon documenting this type of contracts. So there was like an agreement between the government of China and the government at the Portuguese colonies in Mozambique to contract Chinese workers, but manual work to work in the construct of buildings, wood and things like that. And the research said that things not went well because people were contracted to do things, but when they come to Mozambique, the Portuguese government said that they are not sufficiently prepared to work, and the documents referred 30 people, and most of them had to return 2 years later because they are not working well. Some days they are not going to work, so there were many problems. And this is an interesting period to study this thing, because it was after the end of the slave trade, but not the end of slavery. Then it was the end of slavery, and this kind of indentured labor was spreading in the Portuguese colonies. Not only the Portuguese colonies, but also the British colonies, and there are some episodes interesting to read about. And
Thank you.
I'm sorry to only.
That's fine. Thank you very much.
To speak short about this. Right. Thank you.
So we have thought about finishing this conference with a documentary. So it will be nice about it's Baluchistan, right? And yeah. So please, if you can set it up here, you guys. And yes, I want to. conference. I would like to close formally this conference before we watch a documentary here online and before we go. So thank you very much for everybody who has come here, having long trips, having difficulties in arriving or whatsoever, and also for those who have been online for us. Thank you very much.